praises to the Most High God. All praise to Jesus Christ. Light vision on the beat.
We're going to see Deuteronomy chapter 6. And can I get someone who will read verses 1 through 3, and then someone else to read 4 through 9?
I'll do 1 through 3.
1 through 3, and then somebody else to do 4 through 9. Thanks, John.
6, number 1. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, Lord your God, you and your son and your son's sons, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Did you say to 8 or?
To 9.
9. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Okay, so this is one of those passages that we know we've heard probably 1,000 times, especially if we're talking about child rearing. This is the passage that is brought up right here. But I really want to focus in on verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. What does that mean?
Listen.
It does mean, yeah, so the command is to listen, but what does it mean that the Lord our God is one?
He's the only one.
Okay. Yep.
Does it have something to do with the omnipresence? Because he is everywhere, but he is one God.
Okay.
He's not split up in any way.
All right.
It's speaking of the Trinity too.
Yeah, is that a Trinity reference?
Possibly. What other options are there?
The Lord alone is.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's also a slam against polytheism, which needs to be there.
Okay.
It means he's the only God.
Okay. Good. All right.
Not a God, but the God.
Okay. All right. I'm going to push back on that interpretation, although that is the typical interpretation of this passage. God is a monotheist God. All right. So we have one God. I'm not trying to argue that polytheism is real. All right. But when he uses the word one there, I want to argue that this text is not telling us, although he is one God, it's not an argument for the Trinity here, that what's actually happening in this text is that it's saying, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is unity, or unified, is what's being said there. So it's talking about the attribute of the unity of God, or the unification of God, the oneness. And let me tell you why I think that. In verses 1 through 3, what's happening in that context? What's happening in the context of 1 through 3?
Follow the commandments.
Follow the commandments, right? You're going to fear God. Follow him.
Keep the statutes.
Keep the statutes. Don't go in a ton of different directions.
It'll go well with you if you do.
It'll go well with you if you do. And then he says this at the beginning, when he's about to really lay out the main command that Jesus will say is the most important command in Scripture. He says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. if the Lord is one, what is the necessary response to the Lord being one? Verse 5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Okay, this has been quoted so many times by people, and in the New Testament is quoted frequently. What does it mean that we are to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your might? So many people have used this to divide up, like to talk about the divisions of the human being, right? There's a mind and a heart and a soul. Like, that is, if you take that from this text, you are doing the exact opposite of what this text is trying to tell us to do.
Because we're a representation of God. God is one.
God is one. If God is unity, what is the response to that? You better be unity too. And what is your unity? Love the Lord your God, not with part of you, with everything that makes you you. You better love the Lord your God. Right? So the context of calling the Lord one is in the context of making Israel be one. And so when we're talking about the unity of God, what we're talking about is this. This is why I think this is a starting point to understand God, because our response to God and who He is in the beginning of going through the commandments with the people of Israel, identifying them as a nation, starts with this. The main commandment of them to love the Lord their God with all their heart, mind, soul starts with the preamble of the Lord our God is one. And so that's why I start with this attribute for us this morning. God is unity. And what that means is God is not divided. He isn't split into parts. We cannot split up God into all of these different parts. The theological terminology for this, so we're going to get into some theological weeds here for a second, and then we'll pull out, and you'll see how this is really, I think, very applicable for us. Here's the weeds of it. It's called divine simplicity. Divine simplicity. Okay? So just break that. Divine, God, right? Simplicity, God is actually quite simple. Not simple in His greatness or anything like that, but God is simple. And what we mean, divine simplicity or the unity of God, means this. All right, you ready? Here is this definition is going to blow your minds. God is who He is. There it is. That's divine simplicity. God is not anything other than He is.
I am.
I am.
I am.
The great I am.
He is.
Yeah.
Right? So, and this, God is, right? That's it. That's the unity of God. He is.
Unification.
That's right. So, but this is why this is important. So when we think of the attributes, typically what people try to do is they try to divide up God's attributes in a whole different kinds of ways. One of the ways people do it is kind of think about a pie, all right? Where you have like we all like pie, right? Okay, so there's pieces of pie, and then we do that with God's attributes. Like there's God here, but then God's love is this slice, and His power is this slice, and His eternity is this slice. That's a terrible way to think of God. And it's a wrong way to think of God. And that's what we're saying with divine simplicity. So when John says God is love, he's not saying God has love. He's saying God is love. Love makes up everything that God is. But so does every other attribute at all at the same time. God doesn't have love for His people. He is love for His people.
It's just like trying to wrap your head around Jesus being 100% man and 100% God.
Yes, yes.
It's like you can't. It's impossible to really fathom.
Well, I think that the idea here that we can wrap our head around is that, and so this is what the idea is God is equal to His nature. God and His nature are the same thing. Like we can't separate the two. Like we do with us. We're a sinful being, and so we have sin, and so there's who I am, and then there's the sin struggle within me. And we feel this division within ourselves. God isn't who He is, and then His nature's over here. Like God just is everything that He is. He is all loving. He is all powerful. He is all just. He is all wrathful. Like He's all of those things at one time, never changing. Right? So He doesn't over here think to himself, well, I think love is the best attribute to show. Man, I think over here, wrath is the best attribute to show. No, when he is loving in all wrath and justice.
And when he's wrathful.
When he's wrathful, he is all wrathful in all justice and love.
Amen.
Like, he doesn't do things, he doesn't separate parts of himself. He doesn't have a bad day and then things go differently. He doesn't have a plan and it doesn't come to fruition. Like, God is who he is. And John, I think you're exactly right when you say, who should I say sent me? Say, I am who I am sent me. Like, that's his answer. That's where we get the name Yahweh from. Like, what should we call you? We should call you I am. Because you are. You are being. You are goodness. You are life. Like, and this is where, the people will ask this crazy question. Can God command something that's evil? Like, is it possible for God to command something that's evil? And so the philosophical argument goes, is something good because God has commanded it, or does God command it because it's good? Right? Like, that's how people try to argue this crazy thing. And they're trying to put God's goodness and God in separate camps with one another. But the unity of God says we can't do that. People will say, well, could God command something evil and then it be good? No, because that would be totally against his nature. It would be a self-contradiction because God isn't anything but good. It just is who he is. And so when we're talking about the unity of God, and this is what we see here happening in this text, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is unified. He is who he is. He is unified in his purposes for loving you. He is unified in his purposes of calling you out to be his people. He is unified in his purposes and his design and his plan and his attributes. There is not an internal wrestling with God to figure out who he really is. He's not going through a teenager phase of trying to figure out what he's going to be for the rest of his life.
He's not a human.
No, he is not. He is wholly different from us. That's exactly right. He is who he is. And the preamble to all of the commands of God and who the people of Israel are supposed to be starts with this attribute being put on display before the people of Israel. I, the Lord, I am one. My purposes, my intentions, my design, my attributes is one. I am who I am. That's who's sending you. Therefore, you better love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and self. If I am one as God, and my purposes are united, then you yourselves as my people need to be one in singular devotion to me. Like, that's the idea. That's how you represent God. That's how you image God to the world. In the same way he is unified in his purposes in all things, you need to be unified in your purposes in all things as well. Do you see how that context makes more sense now?
When you speak on this, it reminds me so much of King David. There was this time where I would have thought, yeah, David, like he's God's man, you know. But yet when David sins, and he royally sins, he gets taken to the woodshed. You know, he gets lots of consequence on him for his misconduct when he does it.
Yeah.
So, are you saying that? Some people like at work that aren't necessarily Christians and didn't like grow up around that stuff. It's like that's what they ask. Like, well, if your God is so good, why would you let on that?
That's right. So if God is unified in purpose, right, and his purpose from eternity's past has been to send his son to die for sinners, then his purpose was the fall. Like if he truly is sovereign over all things and literally can do whatever he wants, his purpose is for the fall of man and the sending of his son. It's his purpose. He is unified. That didn't happen and catch him off guard, or else he's not unified.
But now I'm wondering why.
Romans 9 deals with that.
Mm-hmm.
Paul deals with that very deeply, specifically in Romans 9. You know, like, what if God, to display his power and glory, you know, I forget the wording exactly, but basically, you know, created some for destruction and some for salvation, for honor. Yeah.
And it is strange to think about, like, I guess it doesn't, I'm not like trying to just diminish, but it almost does kind of diminish. It's like, he is this ginormous God who is all powerful, all knowing, all loving, and he made all of us just to show his glory to something that he made.
Yep.
Like,
Which only he can.
yeah.
But see, from our perspective, it's like how arrogant.
When we do that's arrogant.
Exactly.
Unless you're the God who deserves all glory
Right.
and is all powerful and
I
actually.
thought about that too. Is God prideful? Well, yeah, because
But
But it's not sin.
it's not sin.
yeah.
When you are the all glorious one.
Is it proud? Is it wrong for me to be proud of, the floor that I put in my house?
If
Is
you
there
did a good
anything wrong
job.
with that? Yeah.
Well, no, it's like
Right.
so. If someone were to go, let's bring this down to earth.
Okay.
If someone were to go to Patrick Mahomes and
Yeah.
say, "Man, you're one of the best quarterbacks to ever play a game," and he was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm playing really well."
Thanks, that's my goal, right?
It's just like, well, yeah, he's not wrong. It's not arrogant to just like this is what like we're not asking for false humility here. No, I'm not good. It's like, no, if you're good, you're good. It's okay. Like God is good. Like he's really good. And it's not wrong for him to demand all glory from his creation when he created everything from nothing, right? Like and then that's exactly where Paul's argument goes. So then you would find injustice with God. That's the question that he asks. And he goes, who are you,
Yeah.
you creature, to claim that the creator can't do whatever the heck he wants with his creation? Like, that's exactly where Paul's argument goes, is that's the question that's asked. Is like, oh, this doesn't seem fair. And he's like, who are you, man? And so, yeah, I mean, and this is where people will go when they deal with pain and suffering in the world. And I think Christians give terrible answers to this question. Let's be clear, God is not the author of evil. Like, he doesn't do evil. He is not the author of sin in any way. Even though he purposed and planned what would take place, he is not the one who creates evil. Like, he doesn't do that. Like, scripture is very clear about that. He himself is not sinful. However, with all of that being said, you cannot say that God's hands are just like, man, off the wheel.
He created this.
He did. He created Satan
So-
as a good angel of light who sinned.
So he.
But he created
But
him
he was
knowing.
Well, I guess no, he wasn't.
But see, that's just the thing. If God knows all things, and this is where, like, want to get into semantics. Well, it's like, well, God created all things, and he created Adam and Eve with the fruit there, knowing they were going to sin. He could have just not done it, knowing that they weren't going to do it, but he did it anyway. It's just like, when we get on the semantics of this, it's like, we have a sovereign God who is in control of all things, and you just can't get away from that. And we try to do that with suffering all the time, saying like, well, suffering's happened, but God like just doesn't know, or he can't do anything about it, or it's just like, man, he wishes it wasn't happening in some way. And it's like, man, it's like, but if you believe in a unified God who is over all things, who is one and his purposes and design for all things, then you have to have a sovereign God who is actually over everything, who actually can do things. Like, he's not undivided.
So it's almost like he gave himself an enemy to show his glory. Because he probably knew Lucifer was going to sin too, right?
Well, of course, if he's
Yeah.
sovereign.
How did Luther say it? He said, like, the devil is the devil, but he's God's devil. I like to think of Lucifer, or Satan, I like to think of him as a rabid dog on a nice chain link.
He's a pawn. He has
Yeah,
to
he's
go.
a pawn, yeah.
He has to go to God to ask permission to cause suffering with Job.
Yep.
And God gives him permission to do it.
So then he allows Eve.
He allows it. He certainly allows it. I mean,
But
have
he
you not
doesn't-
looked around? He
But
allowed
he
it.
doesn't. But he's not the author of it. But he's sovereign over all things.
Correct.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
Most High God, all praise to Jesus Christ.